delighted that you're able to join us for today's webinar with Andrea Deszö's Unexpected Journey. Let me first thank everyone for participating. Andrea, Dr. Carl Herbert, Mara Williams, Caroline Stoller, all of us will be together in an unexpected journey this afternoon. I had an opportunity to be present as Ian is now installing the exhibition, and I would just encourage anyone within travel distance to come and see the works as installed. We've not only included the most recent pieces, but a few of the earlier pieces. And it really is a spectacular experience to walk into not only an unexpected journey, but I would say an unexpected delight. It is really, in fact, one of the tributes to Andrea's creative process that she has been able, over the years that we have known her, to stay in touch with an inner spirit and inner vision that stimulates her to experiment with a wide range of media, but at the same time, the integrity of her vision informs each and every piece that she has created. So I wanted to begin by starting with my usual quote from Brother Thomas, because I think that it provides us with a framework for the discussion today. He wrote, "Risking and dreaming are primary acts of creativity." And that speaks precisely to this unexpected journey and unexpected delight that we are about to share with you. So Caroline, if you want to share the title page and then the first image, it would be wonderful. Thank you. There it is. And in a rare situation where we've overprinted on the image, now you'll see the image freestanding, I think. There it is. So let's begin with this. And in this case, Mara, I'd like to ask you, if you don't mind, just to begin to respond to this first image, and we'll go from there, please.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you so much for introducing me to Andrea's work. I did not know it prior to you sending me the catalog, and I'm just absolutely fascinated on a number of levels. Of course, the imagery being primary, but Mara is a technique geek, and I've been introduced to new techniques that Andrea will explain to us in more detail later. But the idea of a chorus, most of us have some sort of church affiliation that might have had choral groups involved in it, and school groups with choral groups involved. Some of us might like choral music. And for those of us who have a passing familiarity with theater, the Greek chorus, which has a very specific way of representing people of the world within a story, is a dynamic, integral part of storytelling in the Western tradition. So the idea of having a chorus where you have both community internally for making music together, and music celebrates the spirit, it celebrates community, and it may celebrate a god or godhead, as well as these other aspects, just intrigues me. The way these figures seem to dance and move and be making music in a way that is fully embodied intrigues me. The patterning and the rhythm structures of the patterning, and how that becomes syncopated or rhythmic or harmonious, intrigues me. The fact that some have feet and some seem to be swimming intrigues me. And so the minute something is this intriguing, what I want to do is have a conversation about it with myself, with the maker, even if the maker is not present, and with anyone who might be in the viewing space with me. Now, this kind of weird Zoom universe that we're in, I'm not in the gallery speaking to each and every one of you and having you all start building upon how we're making meaning for this image. But it is just so rich in interpretive impossibilities. It is so engaging to both the mind and the heart and the spirit all at once. endlessly fascinating that I hope all of you who are in the webinar who do happen to live close enough to Boston can get in and see this very dynamic show.
Andrea, do you want to talk a bit about process in terms of this? And then there's a small video that shares that as well.
Yes, so thank you, Bernie, and thank you, Ruth. I'm sorry, thank you, Mara. What am I? Thank you, Mara, for that really interesting train of thought. And yes, this painting started with glass, actually. So at the basis of the painting is a pyrovitriography print, and pyrovitriography is a glass printmaking technique, quite unusual, that we are going to see in the next video. So I made pyrovitriography monotype at the Museum of Glass in Tacoma, Washington last summer. And that for me is this kind of process of having a conversation with the medium of printmaking with hot glass, but really it's a conversation with chance. It's a conversation with the mark that the hot glass prints onto the paper is never complete and it's never perfect. There's always gaps, and those gaps are the spaces that I find the most interesting and inspiring. So basically, I start from a pyrovitriography monotype, which I create with hot glass in a hot glass studio. And then in that incomplete image, I start painting. And in the end, the pyrovitriography piece is fully integrated in a painting. And that's what we are looking at now. But the initial rhythm and the initial, like the kind of seed of the composition or the starting energy of the piece is there from the beginning, from the pyrovitriography piece. Can we watch the video to see how the pyrovitriography is made? So hot glass cylinder, 2100 degrees, rolled over thick watercolor paper slowly, and the images that I created onto the glass prior to it being heated up is being burned into the paper, transferred into the paper. If we are lucky, the paper doesn't catch fire. Sometimes it does, and that's kind of part of the adventure.
So, the sepia tone that we're seeing on our screen is not a sepia ink or a sepia paint. It's actually burnt paper.
Yes, it's actually the burn from this process. And I work with several different papers. So depending on what kind of paper we are using, whether it's a traditional Japanese paper or whether it's a Western watercolor paper, the sizing in the paper is different. The chemical composition of the paper is different. So the burn is kind of different. The way the burn leaves the mark on the paper is different based on what the paper is made up from.
Mara and Andrea, I just wanted to also share my response to the image, if we can go back to that for a minute. There's this wonderful quote of Thomas's that I think really resonates with this piece and many of the pieces that we'll be looking at today. These ancient memories seem to remain and emerge in symbols. This feels like a very ancient image, and at the same time, obviously created in the contemporary world. It has a rhythm that you referred to, Mara, of the chorus, but at the same time, it's as if ancestors are speaking out to us for me, and at least imparting to us part of their tradition and their spirit. So there's a visual energy in the piece itself that comes through as a result both of the technique, but also of the artistic vision that is Andrea's. So that's just my additional thought about it as we move on, but I did want to at least get us back focused on the art itself as well as process. So
I think it's worth noting, because as we go on to the next pieces, that Andrea's work is frequently an assemblage or a collage, if you will, of creation. Each piece, every single piece, is its own individual piece, which may involve the characters, it may involve glass rolling, it may involve a number of things we'll see, but each one is put together in a way that's unique and comes out as in a special sort of way. It's as though there are these icons, these created characters, and we'll see much more of that Andrea works with in various media, but the assembling of them, the putting them together creates a story each time, each and every time that's unique and actually quite beautiful when all is said and done.
We can start with this one for sure. Mara, would you like to talk a bit about this particular image?
Okay, well, the title, Sunrise, not Sunset, just puts you in the frame of mind of early dawn with this rose color, bubbling up in this landscape that is also a theater set somehow. I can't quite get over how theatrical, how wonderfully theatrical this work is. And here we are in a place, imbued with morning light, a little bit of silhouetting against that morning light, in a place that, is both mysterious and natural. You're actually down here, almost in a bug's eye view, down watching the little creatures live within the universe of the pods and seeds and blossoms and leaves of their world. And there's a whole microcosm, and yet each of these creatures isn't just a bug on a tree. There's an essential personality type. They've been anthropomorphized, to use a technical term, into creatures that are seemingly magical. And are they magical because the natural world is magical? Or are they magical because they're inheriting a place of protection or spirit or life or mystery?
I love that you mentioned theater, because when Sue and I first encountered Andrea's work at the Museum of Art and Design, it was part of a paper cut exhibition, and her paper cut was enclosed in a box with a light above it that looked very much like it was theater. And if you move the paper cut forward or backward, it changed the entire balance of the scene that was being presented. So the notion of seeing these as theater itself, but theater with the spirit of the artist as dominant in each one of them, is really quite miraculous. And to be able to do it both three-dimensionally with the paper cuts, but also now to do it with these various techniques that certainly engaged her, but at the same time realizing that she uses the technique solely as a vehicle to share the images and the vision that is hers specifically. So Andrea, you should speak about it rather than me, please.
Thank you, Bernie, and thank you, everybody. So yeah, it's when I sit down to paint or to make something, I'm connecting with the image in a kind of embodied way, in a kind of part from the heart. So I'm not really trying to execute an idea that I have that I can articulate in words. I'm painting to find out where the image is or what the image wants. And so it's very difficult to me to kind of engage on a intellectual level when I work. It's much easier to step back afterwards, preferably if I haven't seen the piece for a few weeks, and look at it and even be surprised, like, oh, look at it, I know what this is and I know where that comes from, but I had no idea when I was making it. It was solely the kind of bringing forth an image and connecting with an image in a physical way that I kind of really am pulled towards, and I'm kind of going to get there, but I don't know where there is. There's an anecdote that I actually have about when a piece is finished. When I'm from Transylvania originally, and a few years ago I went back to Transylvania, and those who know me know that one of my absolute favorite food is watermelon. I'm pretty obsessed with them, and I eat every day at least one really big watermelon. So when I went home to Transylvania, I wanted to get a real watermelon, like the way I remember them from childhood. So the way it's done there is people come from the countryside with a mountain of watermelon. They sleep next to the mountain and they sell it to the city people. So, and the way they sell it is they pick a watermelon and they go through this mysterious process of like feeling it out whether it's right. And it's not any of the methods that we know of, stamping, of like, they kind of listen to it in a quiet way and then they give it to you and you can taste it right there in front of them. They sample it for you. And if it's not perfect, you don't have to take it. And it's perfect every time. And so I wanted to know how you can tell what's a perfect watermelon. So I asked this man who was the farmer who grew the melon down south in Romania. And I asked him, so can you tell me, like, how do you know which one to pick, which is the good one? And he said, well, what is your profession? And I'm like, I'm an artist. He's like, what do? You paint? I'm like, yeah, I paint. He said, so how do you know when a painting is done? And I'm like, well, that's a very good question. And I was thinking for a little while and I said, I don't know how to explain it, but you just know. And he's like, well, it's the same with watermelons. So it's one of those things where it's hard at the time to articulate it in any kind of verbal way, but you just kind of know.
I think,
I love it.
Andrea,
Go ahead, Russ.
on your works, you frequently make quite specific representation or documentation of the materials you work with. In this case, there's the mokuhanga. Can you tell the folks out there a little bit about how important particular materials are to you? I mean, even to specific types of paper, if I read this right.
Yes. So yes, and that's one thing that is just so lovely and wonderful about making work, making art, that you're dealing with expressing something very immaterial with like real materials. So I love materials and I love tools. I'm completely obsessed with tools and I keep take good care of my tools because for me they have personhood. And so paper the same way. I like to get paper that has personality, that's made by somebody, that's made by a person following a particular method, and each paper behaves in a particular way. You kind of have to get to know them to see what they want and where they want to go. And mokuhanga is a Japanese woodblock printing technique that I learned from amazing Hawaiian artist and printmaker, Hiroki Morinue. He taught me how to cut mokuhanga and how to print mokuhanga. And it's water-based printing, and you don't need a press. You're printing with a round beren, something that it's a tool that is made in Japan, and it's fantastic. It's an amazing tool that you just kind of roll over the surface, and that's how it transfers the color. And I use papers that typically come for this particular kind of painting that typically come from Japan or from Korea. And I create mokuhanga monotypes, and then I use those as the initial statement in a painting. I then paint on them and I obscure parts and I bring other parts out and I work with what is already there. I wanted to do mokuhanga woodblock printing for a very long time, and I didn't know how to even start. I didn't have the tools, I didn't have the materials. I knew that it's very highly specialized of what you need and how you do it. So my entry into mokuhanga was through laser engraved wood. Because I didn't have the tools and techniques when I got my hands on a laser cutter, which was at first time at Haystack's Fab Lab, I tested it on a laser cut piece of wood, and I realized that I can actually print with a laser cut wood. And because I got so into that, then I found an opportunity. I was really lucky to have the opportunity of Hiroki actually teaching me how to cut by hand, and then slowly, I learned about the materials, what kind of wood you're supposed to use, how to take care of your tools, and so on and so forth.
It's great.
Thank you. I just want to go back to your earlier story about the watermelon and confirm that I too have watermelon every day and feel even more connected to you through our watermelons. When you're talking about the use of materials, I think the next image will certainly confirm that and show how, once again, you're excited by what is available to you, and then you bring who you are, as you said, the art of the heart, to it. And what emerges are these rather personal, but at the same time, intriguing images. So let's look at this particular one and have you talk about it. And then maybe Mara can chime in as well in terms of how she sees it.
Thank you. These are 6 protectors. And the way this body of work started is during COVID, during the lockdown. I was here at home in Western Massachusetts, isolated in my house. And I wasn't sure when we are ever going to be able to be among people and among friends anymore. And when we are going to have access to the kinds of materials that we had access to before. So I had this piece of Japanese handmade paper that I used for art. And then I had these little strips of cut-off papers. And because I wasn't sure whenever, if ever, we are going to be able to get those kinds of papers again, I wanted to hold on to every strip. So I cut up that little, like 1 inch wide and maybe 6 inches long piece of paper. I cut it up to like even shorter pieces. And because I had all the time in the world on my hand and nowhere to go, I started cutting out these little characters with scissors and a hole punch to create these companion figures, these companions and protectors. They came in families. So these 6 are one family. They are related to each other. And so I cut out 117 of these little tiny protectors, which later then I worked more in other materials. So I worked with woodblock printing. They appear in my mokuhanga prints. They appear in my paintings. These ones are wood reliefs, wall pieces. And for me, I wanted to evoke the kind of protector spirit of the house, or the kind of small scale work that people can put in their homes as these companion friendly impersonations of friendly energies and of good characters in some way. And so each one is in their home, in their own home, in their own house, which the environment around them matches their character or their personality. And later it occurred to me that the way they are separated into their own little niches reminded me also of how we were kind of separated into our own little houses and looked out through these windows, like the way we are looking now through this Zoom to other people who are separated and sitting through their own little windows, and we are looking into somebody's world, into the little cutout space that they provide to the world of themselves and their house.
So Mara, can you speak from your little cutout world?
I will speak from my little square.
Yes.
First of all, I'd like the people to this overall piece is just under 12 inches tall and just over 13 inches wide. So each little box has a figure that's probably only about 4 inches, just so you get a sense of scale of what the piece is in your head, and how this cell-like structure operates as a neighborhood or as window panes. Or Zoom panes. But I love how it's bringing the story of protective deities into the 21st century, into the era of COVID, that they were created in the era of COVID, because protective deities just go back millennia. And sometimes it's cultural, the kitchen god, for instance, in Japan that only appear to certain housewives that have some relationship. There was a wonderful story in the New Yorker just about a week ago on the kitchen god, which has 3 faces. And at the end of the piece, she kisses each cheek on each face. So she gives 6 kisses to the kitchen god in her life. But we've had protective deities in most cultures, and sometimes in a temple, they're protective deities as you enter a temple, and they're scaled to the temple. But these are scaled to our life. These are scaled to as a personal protective deity. And they each, I mean, we will see another set that are painted completely differently, and their bodies are very different. They're clearly one family, and this is clearly another. And seeing this set, there are lots of points and right angles in them, and then there's this energy of patterning that is, punctuation marks in a very different way than the next piece we're going to have. And then she treats the next piece with a completely different material, and I'm fascinated at how they both speak to each other, and how very specific and particular each set of deities are in and of themselves.
Can we look at the next one now and then maybe go back and forth, Caroline? There you go.
Just
So continue, Mara. That's a wonderful way to
So
move in.
these are more, sort of bobble-headed or bubble-headed. The other ones were spiky, and spiky has an energy and an animation. Not that these ones don't have some spikes on them, but because their faces and their heads are rounder, there's something more playful about them, something more benevolent. And of course, the coloration is so completely differently. On this one, you've used gel pens. And I don't know if you if people at home can sort of blow up. Yesterday, I was blowing them up so that I could see just how finely articulated her patterns are, where on the first piece, the gray piece, the wash seems to be X patterned, just hand washed on, where this one, little teeny dots become plaid patterns and crisscross patterns. And just the pastel quality, and the gel marker has a textural quality that is just very different, and they're much more embellished and much more playful than the first set. And if I could just say, one has sort of this Nevelson, bring everything down so that you're really paying attention to the form in terms of color. On this one, you've added a top layer of color on top of the form, and you're paying attention to both things in a sort of livelier way. One's not better than the other, they're just different.
I love it. Andrea, I think you get equal time.
Thank you. Yeah, they are just very different. And I feel that a lot of the characters that I created during those months of lockdown, 117 characters, there were a lot of different days with different feelings and different energy and different level of anxiety and hope and thoughts. And I guess that totally reflects in the figures. So some families are much more feisty than others. Some families are more playful. Some families are more clueless. So they kind of look like they, and then the same character in a different context can also change their attitude a little bit. So I don't know, for me, I saw them as these really kind of lively manifestations of energies that were surrounding us and surrounding me, and they were embodiments of these various kinds of states of mind, and bring their more exuberant or more sober energies to the world, I hope.
Rusty, do you have some thoughts?
Well, I think one thing, and I know Andrew brought this out before, the 3-dimensionality of these, because they look very much 2-dimensional initially. As you look across the surface, the biggest image, the the individuals themselves are on that surface. But Andrea's created this with multiple layers. And I think it's fascinating how the very simple depth given to each of these blocks adds to what the experience is as you encounter them. And especially when if you're here, you get a chance to get up a little closer to them. The dots that Mara referred to are certainly more telling, but certainly the depth of that you were able to create, Andrea, is striking in a way. I mean, maybe you could speak just for a second about having done it that way.
Thank you. Yeah, so I was really interested, and I am still working with this and experimenting with this shallow relief idea. I'm really into bas reliefs, bas reliefs, and shallow reliefs in general. And then these ways of creating collages, sculptural collages that are on a flat base, and they just come forward a little bit, but they can create a richness, a kind of rich world within that shallowness, with how everything is composed and stacked together. And I'm just really interested in the possibilities, the visual possibilities and the expressive possibilities of that, and of working with wood. And yeah, it's for me, it's something that I'm really curious about, and that really engages me on all these different levels, on the kind of material and physical level and the embodied level, and the kind of making level, and how do you engage with being in the world through work, through labor, so the whole labor aspect of the whole thing, but at the same time to express something that is somehow beyond words, or it's like unthinkable even. You kind of have to do it this way to kind of do it in any way, or at least for me, those things are not accessible via, intellect or in any other way. And it just seems like a wonderful thing to be able to engage all these parts and then create something. Yeah, I'm really into that, I guess.
There's a wonderful quote of Brother Thomas's, which I had inadvertently pulled out to just share, which is jump and then sprout wings. And certainly the sense of your own jumping and continuing to sprout wings with each of the techniques that you use, but at the same time, they grow out of your own personal awareness of the world in which you are living and in which we are living. And doing that, you enhance our sensitivity to the gift of life that we now have. I want to move on to the dream, if we can, and have you speak about it, if you will, first, and then we'll go to Mara. It's really quite an extraordinary accumulation of moving images in a wonderful way.
Thank you, Bernie. It's a watercolor painting on a handmade paper. And I just started to paint, and I use mostly, or all, I guess all earth colors and colors that could be ochres. I'm really interested in digging and collecting ochre at riverbeds and places where one finds such things. And I'm interested in using a palette that people might have used in the very old days, ancient days, to make images. And so this painting has come about since I've been really interested in these colors, in these natural earth colors. And I just started painting, and I painted it over a long period of time, and I kept adding to it. And yeah, this is the result.
And Mara, how do you see this?
Well, you earlier, you held up your hands with your indigo tipped fingernails because you had been working and making your natural pigments. And there's a big move towards going back to making artists making their own pigments, their own sepia, their own ochre, their own indigo. And this is sort of how your process is working with your imagery. Because this piece, when you look at the types of creatures that are here, seems to be of the earth, of the ocean, of the sky. You know, wind, earth, water, sky are all represented in different ways here by the types of limbs on figures, or fins on figures, wings on figures, which then of course presupposes the wind and the earth and the sea, and the creatures of those things. We have creatures of the night and we have creatures of the day. We also have, like, there's like a little skeleton up in one corner and another one over here. So we have creatures of the now and creatures of the past. So life and death are both represented. So this seems to me to be a very primal piece, but not a frightening piece.
Wow. Rusty, do you have some thoughts? I think it's amazing. Thank you, Mara, so much.
I think it's a wonderful amalgamation, and I think what Mara had to say, how it's representative of things. I'd be interested, Andrea, in sort of your feelings about whether there was really an attempt to do that, or this is sort of a subconscious evolving piece of artwork that just ended up with all those things in it. It turns out to be quite beautiful. The coloring is fabulous, and the representations are very, very interesting. But I wonder again just how what your thoughts were in creating it. Was all completely random, or there was a point at which you said that the birds will be in the upper level and the sea people will be in the lower.
Thank you, Rusty and Mara. Well, that's a really interesting question, whether it's random or whether it's not random. But if we know, when we think that something is random, whether that's really random, or does it feel that way to our thinking mind, but there's some kind of a sense in it that we might not necessarily have that kind of access to. I don't know. The way this felt to me, the way I try to open this painting is to welcome everybody, seen and unseen, into the picture. And so these are the people who showed up.
That's lovely.
That's a great way to say it.
Nice. Well, there are a lot of people who seem to have shown up in this particular one. Can we move on to the laser cut piece, which is really as well as we can present it, but it's not at all like seeing it in person. And I really, really encourage everyone to try to get into the space, into the gallery, to see these particular pieces. They're not easy to install. I think Ian has done an extraordinary job with the total show. And these particular pieces stand out. So Mara, would you like to speak just briefly about them?
So there's a long tradition of paper cutting, and there's a long tradition of producing multiple layers of paper. So the silhouette form, and puppetry, it's used a lot. So, but what strikes me is it's again a shallow relief technique. There'll be another picture which shows how these tunnel books actually are objects, that there's a depth quality to them, and then there's, so here you see, so you're seeing basically it's a scene set with an actor in 3 or 4 levels of what we would call in the theater the flats. So it's frontal, it's the 4th wall removed. You've got your scenic elements layering back, and you've got your narrative element, your principal character, as it were, which is the Wampus cat. And the minute you start, like, a Wampus cat is a particularly American folk story animal. It may have other relatives in other cultures, but here you are, with the kind of ancient oak trees with a feeling that the Spanish moss is there, that you're in a particular part of Americana, a particular storyline that relates to us as an American people.
So Andrea, how did you end up creating this? And we're going to be looking at another one as well at the same
Yeah,
size.
so this is part of a body of work that, again, I created during COVID lockdown, and I had been invited to create a show at the Columbus Museum in Columbus, Georgia, and Columbus is by the Chattahoochee River. And I wanted this installation be site specific. So I was looking at folk tales and folk beliefs that sprung up around the Chattahoochee River. And I ultimately settled on these characters that are either animal or kind of cryptozoology characters that either the colonial Americans, the colonists, or the native people who lived in that area saw in the area, and that they became part of legends and myths of that area. And the Wampus cat is one of those characters. It's a female energy character. She's really pissed off, and she's angry, and you don't want to mess with her. And I just really connected with this character and her powerful wild energy that appears in these night forests. I grew up in a communist regime, in a very oppressive and repressive public space, where you weren't able to travel and you weren't able to move about freely. And so the way we traveled, or the way I traveled personally, growing up, was through my imagination. So for me, going someplace could only take place in my imagination, through reading books and through imagining myself in certain spaces. So tunnel books for me bring back somehow, in some way, that notion, that feeling of not being able to go somewhere in a bodily way. Even the larger tunnel books that I make are quite small. They are not the size that we could inhabit in our bodies as we would if it was like a big size theater set or something we can step into. And part of that is always because I'm interested in creating these, I'm thinking of them as these spaces of longing, to create these shallow relieved imaginary spaces that, when you really look at it, just like in that second picture, we see that they are thin layers of paper that are placed one in front of the other. There's really no trick to it. The way you light them, then they can create this powerful illusion of space, even though objectively there's almost no space there. There are a few inches. And so depending on how you light it, and I agree, it's challenging to show them in a space that is illuminated for other work. Ideally, they are shown in completely dark spaces where only the work you can control the lighting, which is how they have been shown before, like this type of works in museums or like in collectors' homes, where you can control, how everything is displayed. But with that said, all that stuff kind of adds up to, when it's done in a way that it all comes together, it creates these small spaces where you cannot inhabit it in a bodily way, just the same way as I wasn't able to inhabit places that I would want to go to, but you could project yourself. And they are not real stories that I'm trying to create here. I'm creating these scenes that I hope that they might serve as these jumping off points for the imagination, where anybody who sees them can come up with their own story of what is happening here. And I'm not trying to answer these things. I'm just trying to present a situation where people can inhabit it with their own longing or with their own ideas.
Let's look at the next one now as well. And Rusty, if you have some thoughts about being able to inhabit the space of the butterfly man.
Well, I think these shadow boxes are maybe the most poignant way of saying what Andrea does, and that is she makes you engage with her work. I mean, that's it, because it comes from a certain place in her and she puts it out there in that fashion. There's nothing simple, straightforward, routine about her pieces. They're all, each one's a one-off, each is unique. But these multi-layered, play-like images really are maybe the epitome of engaging you, because you start, Mara was talking about it, you have the main people in the front, and they're fascinating, interesting. Some are scary, some are just humorous, but every one of them makes you say, what is that? And then you say, well, why is that? And then you realize there's no real answer. I mean, then you get exactly where Andrea is hoping to take you, and that is simply that you engage. So this being one of the more complex and fabulous pieces, I mean, these are all cut with a laser in a way that could not be done, I believe, any other way. Andrea has mentioned that before. So the delicateness of this is phenomenal, especially if you are able to see it in person. You'll see how delicate it is. But the overlays, as I said, it just wants to bring you into this. The previous image, I grew up in the South. I know what Spanish moss looks like. I know what the Georgia swamps look like. And it sort of pulls you in. And at the same time, you say, I'm not sure I want to go there, but I'm pulled toward it. But I think this does a similar thing of engaging you for what's in the front, and then carries you to the back. I mean, you start with the major characters, and then you say, well, who's that upside down thing over? Oh, look at that. And it just fabulously works together. And how these shadow boxes, by definition, shadow boxes are lit will change the experience as well. We have several ways of lighting them here in the gallery, each of which sort of provides a little bit different experience.
Absolutely. Mara, do you want to talk briefly about this? As ever, we're moving along more slowly than we should, but that's the way it goes.
Well, I think they're both covered it, but it reminds me of fairy tales, and fairy tales have benevolent characters, and they have characters that are a little scary. And so when you are invited into the woods, as it were, you wonder, am I really going to get out? Am I going to get out alive? There are scary things in the woods, but there are lessons to be learned in the woods, and there's magic in the woods. And I think with Andrea, I find more magic than anything else.
Yeah, fantastic. We're going to move along to a more colorful version of the wood friends, protectors and guardians of us. And Andrea, if you just speak about this a bit, it pops up on the screen in such a wonderful moment after the black and white pieces.
Yes, thank you. Yes, this is a piece that has 20 of them, and the way of treating them is slightly different than either one of those two that we have seen before. They have much bolder color, but they also have a kind of different treatment because some of the backgrounds are engraved, and the color, the way of treating the color is kind of different from house to house or square to square. They come together in this way, almost to me as a kind of cast of characters, as an assembly, as the players in some kind of a play. To me, it seemed theatrical, and I wanted to create something where they can coexist in a space that I made for them in a harmonious and kind of dynamic way. That was what I was after, creating something that has a particular kind of energy and dynamism, and where this particular grouping of characters from different families can coexist.
It's a nice commune that you've created. Mara, do you want to
Thank
speak
you.
briefly about it?
Well, I just want to point out something that I think is very different from the last set of groupings. It's not just larger, and it is these characters. But this is so much more painterly. You know, there are echoes of Asian Sumi painting techniques, the ink technique, the calligraphic technique. There are hints in how you've toned things of the burnt wood, or the burnt paper, so those sepia colors, or the use of ochres that you've dug yourself and turned into copy. But there's much more hand of the artist as a top note in this than I've seen in your other work.
I love it. Rusty, do you have a comment, or we can move on? This is
My comment is that to me, these are like actors on a screen somewhere. They're each individual, and they each have, instead of that sort of sense of collectiveness, these each stand out in their own individual way, much as Mara has described them, and the coloration is fabulous.
so. The next couple are larger installations. Andrea, can you sort of bring us up to date?
Yeah, so this one was at the Grand Rapids Art Museum. I believe it might still be on. They are the same cast of characters that I have in the wood pieces and in the Mokuhanga painting pieces. They are quite large. They are about 9 feet, I think. And these are the ones you can see from the outside. And then there's a frieze on the inside with black and white, quite large characters as well. This one is at the Texas Art Fair. I was doing this with Rice Gallery, and it's a site-specific vinyl mural that since then I installed one at a collector's home. This same installation, this one is called Six-Hearted, what was it called? Six-Hearted Female Wolf posing with human beings, something along those lines. And the idea was that people can stand right next to the main character and engage in some way and then photograph themselves with it. But these are quite large pieces, and it was an installation in that gallery.
Very, very impressive as well. Mara, did you want to speak about either of the two?
Well, it is impressive because you went from postage stamps that you created while you were locked up to these 4-inch pieces that we've seen in various configurations. Most of your work is quite small. It is a testament to your attention to detail, that you can go to a scale. If something starts at 1 inch, a lot of times it will fall apart at 1 foot, let alone at 6 feet or 12 feet. So I think the richness and finesse of your embellishment in the creation of each of these characters, or the landscape, the flora or fauna that you've created as well, really, it's finesse, and that says a lot about you as an artist.
That's a very, very helpful way to understand it. You're absolutely right, Mara. We've worked with some sculptors who may do something very small and think they're going to enlarge it. And when it gets to be enlarged, it doesn't work at all. So the capacity to both create in a relatively small scale and then to enlarge it, and at the same time have it feel equally comfortable and authentic, is really an extraordinary opportunity for all of us to see these large installations alongside the show, which is now, as I'm looking at it, very intimate, and individual pieces welcome the visitors in a very wonderful way. Let's look at the next one if we can. That's great. So Rusty, would you like to go for a day picnic?
Just on the last piece, just again, the context of scalability, Mark very beautifully discussed. it's also should be noted, there are pieces made of mosaic in the subways of New York City in several locations
Yes.
that also have beautiful representation of her images. So the ability to go from a medium to a different medium and maintain the same engaging character, I guess is the best way to say it, and have it feel right is quite unique and quite remarkable. This piece is an interest. I mean, this is again Baltic birch done a little differently, but a very different sort of feeling. There's, you know, a large image, so it's called Day Picnic. So maybe that's an adult in some way. And then groups of maybe two, they're not necessarily twins, but there are two together. And it has a coloration in the way it's framed. Again, the same type of images, let's call them, maybe the same images, but I think they're even a little different, but a very different feel and a wonderful childlike feel. This could hang in a nursery where I'm not sure you'd put a shadow box in a nursery, but this could hang in a nursery and be a wonderful childhood memory, not a nightmare. So again, it's a unique ability to use technique, which Andrea masters absolutely, and then create things that have such versatility.
I have to say something about this piece. This
Please.
is too marvelous for words, and it's everything that Rusty has said it is, and yet the central 6 blocks and several of the other blocks that are not the ones with two figures in one blocks are basically an exquisite corpse game. So there's this reference to surrealist art history and surrealist parlor games that dates back to the 1920s, a century ago now. So for someone like me who loves people doing a nod and a wink to art history, or actually just doing battle with art history or doing battle with a particular artist's vision, I am totally in love with this piece.
That's such
Thank
a
you
nice
so
thing.
much, Mara.
That's wonderful. And Andrea?
Yes, Mara, and yes, Rusty, thank you for both of those very, very good, very powerful comments. Yeah, all those things. And I just really love the unpredictability of the laser engraver. I love the fact that one half of the character, the big central character, the face, one half made on one laser cutter, the other half made on a different laser cutter, they can look so different. So even though it's a digitally guided technique of like the means of production at a certain point has the digital in it, it just makes these unexpected errors where it either burns the wood or it underdoes the wood, which I actually really like. So the way I work is I create thousands and thousands of these modular elements, these laser engraved elements, and then I pick them out based on what I want the piece to do together. And that's how I'm able to, some days the laser cutter is in a certain mood and it's going to burn everything. And I just love that. And some days it's in an undercooked kind of mood and then it kind of does things differently. So if everything would look the same way, it would look very mechanical and it wouldn't look, to me, as holding the same visual interest. I wanted it to look a little bit homemade and a little bit like you would make something kind of in your garage almost. Like a home, you know, those like old mechanics magazines where they would tell how to make a bird feeder. So I wanted it to look a little bit like that, but I was also thinking of the exquisite corpse and the surrealists and all those ways of bringing this together. And I couldn't have done this in any other way except with a laser cutter. It's like one of those things that no matter how you work with wood, this particular piece wouldn't be able to look this way unless done in this particular way.
I love your relationship with tools. You've talked about it on a number of occasions in this Zoom, but to ascribe a laser cutter mood is just marvelous.
That's fantastic. We're going to look at the last piece, if it's okay, please. So, Andrea, if you want to speak briefly about this particular piece, there are a couple of these in the exhibition as well that people will enjoy.
Thank you. Yes, these were made at the Museum of Glass in Tacoma, Washington, and it's a grout technique, which means that there are two different colored glass. There's the white, milky white glass, and the black glass, which when blown out looks this kind of purple. They are layered together. I created this imagery, and there's a way, I'm not going to get into technical details now, but where the two colored glass is like achieved in one piece, and they are at the same level. None of it is like relief or anything. It's all like, ultimately, it looks like it's made from the same material, but the drawing, the painting appears in this color on top of the background. And I just really love working with this technique also, because the unexpected can happen when the piece is blown out and shaped. That's actually distorting the image. So the image is created on a cylinder, but when the piece is shaped, the sculpture is shaped, the drawing on it torques and distorts, and that's kind of what I love about it, that it literally comes alive in the making, and ultimately it gives this painterly feel that to me feels familiar from my paintings. So it feels like the way what this particular method of making and this material can do is something that I'm very interested in and very curious about, and I want to do more of this. And this particular method actually works hand in hand with the pyrovitriography, the rolled hot burn glass vitriography that I do for printmaking. So when I do these, I do also those.
Wonderful. Mara?
Well, I'm glad you made the point for everyone that the cylinder and then the carving of the cylinder, the sandblasting that would take place, and then the reheating. And in one instance, you reheat and you roll, and that will distort and destroy that particular one. On this one, you've brought it up to temperature again. A glass blower has blown and shaped. It is then put in the annealer to cool properly, so it will not be brittle and fragile the way unannealed glass, untempered glass would be. So, again, I happen to be a person who admires technique in work. So your understanding and use of materials at various marks to know that this image we're going to do this with, and then it's going to be annealed, and the technique will make this glass object, this sculptural glass object, which has wonderful animation in it because of the blow up. So that there's sort of the blowing of the glass has blown life into the animation of the character itself, and that other ones have been burnt into a piece of paper, and they almost have their soul burnt into them as opposed to life blown into them, and the difference between those two things and what they make us think and what they make us feel and how they carry your work forward in these various mediums that you've used is, I think, quite exciting.
Thank you.
Rusty, one final word, and then me.
I would reiterate what Mara has said, and that is that Andrea has a connection to technique and allows the technique to direct her or lead her in a certain way, but has an emotional piece behind it, so that every type of piece that she creates has an emotional element to it. But it's just wonderful, Andrea, to hear you talk about how you relate to the technique, to the materials in a creative way. It's not like you're trying to control them or make them do something particular. You're saying, here's what I'm trying, here's where I'm going. Let's see what this material does, but in a very accomplished way, not in an offhanded way. So I think that's what leads to so many different kinds of pieces, all with a very similar, not exactly the same, but a similar sense of newness and engagement that's unique.
Thank you, Rusty. Bernie, can I say a short thing before you go?
Yes, please do.
Okay, so I just realized that there's a lot of fire and there's a lot of water in this show, in this body of work. Like if you really look at everything, it's either been burned, whether it's by the hot shop like fire, burning, blowing, or that kind of stuff, or the laser, which also does a lot of burning, whether it burns the paper or that's how it cuts things out. It burns things out basically. And then there's a lot of water, like the watercolor, the Mokuhanga water-based, everything kind of that goes on top or instead of it is like watercolor stuff. So I realized that it really kind of revolves around this like first water, then fire, or first fire, then water, kind of through and through. And what Mara said before, that the characters in paintings also, like there's underwater, over, there's fire, all that kind of stuff. So yes, thank you.
It's wonderful. I just want to end by saying a number of things, one of which is that it's perfectly clear to listen to you, Andrea, especially what a wonderful communicator you are, both through your art and also admired greatly as a teacher. And I've met a number of your students who come to the gallery, and each one of them talks about your ability to teach and share your perspective, but to honor who they are and their spirit. You've now done that for us in the context of your own work, which is to share with us the quality of your vision, and at the same time, your great affection for being engaged with the tools, if you will, with the means, with the utensils that enable you to create the world that you have created. And finally, I just am thrilled that Rusty and Mara were part of this conversation, because everyone's able to come to your work with what they enjoy and what they know and come away feeling uplifted. Thomas wrote, the only authentic path that we must follow is the one we find within. And so I think at the end of the day, you have been able to continue to follow your inner path and find the means, the utensils, the techniques that allow that to be shared with all of us. So we're enormously grateful to you for the art itself, for being who you are and being present at this conversation and now in the gallery for the next 6 or 8 weeks, which we hope people will come and enjoy. So thank you everyone for being part of this.
You're welcome.
Thank
Thanks
you
for
so
inviting me.
Thank you so much.
Lovely meeting
And
you.
thank you for everybody who came and listened to us talk about the show. Thank you. And I hope that I see many of you very soon, maybe at the opening on Saturday.